In this podcast, two Gen Xers are taking a trip down memory lane, revisiting and reflecting on the cinema of the 1980s. We'll look at the hits and the flops, the studio blockbusters and art house indies, the critically acclaimed, and the universally reviled. The series is hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli, a writer and librarian, and features Dustin Morrow, a filmmaker, author, and professor of film. So pull on your leg warmers, crank up your boombox, and hop in the DeLorean. It's time for the Long Rewind.
Welcome, everybody, to this bonus episode of the Dodge Movie Podcast, as well as a bonus episode of the Long Rewind.
Woo-hoo,
yes?
yes, hi.
Can we say that?
Yes,
We're
absolutely.
here with our good friends, Dustin Morrow and Lisa Molinelli,
Hi.
to talk about Bratz, the movie that Andrew McCarthy wrote, directed, made.
Bratz?
Bratz.
I thought it was brats. I watched the whole 90 minutes looking for sausages. This makes total... You've changed my entire view
Now
of this
we
movie
get
now.
it.
I thought it was brats.
That's why the Sausage King wasn't there.
Oh, Abe
That's right. There was
Froman, not
no
there.
Abe Froman anywhere in this movie.
So I think I was about, half hour, 45 minutes into this, and I emailed you, Dustin, immediately, and I was like, you have to watch this movie because Dustin and Lisa, for those of you who are listening from our podcast, they have a wonderful podcast where they go over the 80s, and you guys had already talked about some of these films, and I was just like, this is the perfect marriage of our two podcasts. We need to do a bonus ep. I want to talk about this movie, and you guys know so much about the 80s. I knew that we would have a great conversation.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's always fun to talk with you guys. And this is especially fun because it's the 80s. So hooray.
Yes, this is in my wheelhouse.
Yes,
Yes, it
especially
is.
Dustin's wheelhouse. You know pretty much everything about
Yes.
these people in these movies.
Yeah, although I have wildly conflicting feelings about this documentary and
Yeah.
its subject.
Oh, yeah.
As I'm
That's
sure
fair.
we'll get into it.
Yeah.
Yes. So should we maybe go over like our first impressions of it? Maybe is that a good way to kick it off? Or our impressions of the Brat Pack in general? Like,
Well, maybe we should start just for people that haven't seen this movie, say what it is, which is it's a documentary funded by, I want to see ABC News. Is that who produced it?
correct.
Right.
ABC Studios.
Based on a book that Andrew McCarthy wrote a year or two ago called Bratz, a Love Story, or Brat, a Love Story. And it's all about his experience of the Brat Pack fallout from the 80s, which was an article written by, what publication was it?
I think it was New York Magazine.
Correct.
Yeah.
So yeah, New York Magazine, there was a reporter that embedded with Emilio Estevez to write a profile on Emilio Estevez and went out with Emilio Estevez into the nightlife of Hollywood with he and his friends who happened to be all these famous people like Rob Lowe and Andrew McCarthy and Judd Nelson, and then wrote a, depending on who you talk to, scathing account of their lives, painting them essentially as kind of unserious actors and people who were in it for the celebrity and the party and the fun. And Andrew McCarthy and all of these actors claim that this had a negative impact on their careers, and that Andrew McCarthy believes he's carried this around with him for 40 years, and so he's written a book about it and now made a documentary about it in which he goes back and he speaks to all of the, or most of the
not all.
OG members of the Brat Pack to get their feelings on it, decades on what it meant for them and their careers.
I would say the documentary proves that he hasn't gotten rid of it. He's been carrying it
Just the
for 40 plus
existence
years.
of it.
Right?
Yeah, I
For
stayed
sure.
away from reviews of this before I watched it, as I do with most movies. But I did hear one critic say Andrew McCarthy needs a hug. That was his big takeaway from this movie.
I
Somebody
agree.
needs to give Andrew McCarthy a hug.
Yeah.
And it did at times feel like 90 minutes of therapy for Andrew McCarthy. And
Yeah.
it did at times feel like he was the only one who was really still
yeah.
carrying this
Yes.
around.
Yes.
Everybody he talked
Right.
to seemed to be...
They moved on.
Yeah.
To the point where if you watch the Emilio Estevez, which I found was the most interesting interview to me, because Emilio Estevez never does interviews about his old, like he's the one member of like the Breakfast Club that never ever shows up to any of the reunions. Even after Hughes died and they all went on the Oscars to pay tribute, he was not there. So it was really jarring to see him in this, and that interview in his kitchen where McCarthy is just verbally spewing all of this trauma that he's carried around with him. You can see there are multiple points where Emilio Estevez has this sort of side eye where he looks directly at the camera, almost like Jim in The Office. and he's just like, and you can read his mind. You get like it's right on his face.
Yeah.
It's just like, why? Oh, this is why I don't do these, and I'm never going to do another one again. So any hope that we fans ever had of Emilio Estevez showing up to like a Breakfast Club Q&A or something were dashed because of this. What looked to me like an awful experience in the kitchen with Andrew McCarthy making this documentary.
I mean, it reminded, I wonder if you guys felt this way. I was watching that conversation thinking, I've been in these conversations before.
Yeah.
I've been Emilio. I think we all probably have been Emilio, where you're just like, yeah, man, I totally get it. And you're like, when can I
when can I leave?
Yeah,
I felt like he was
Like-
giving lots of off camera, but these cues like, yeah, okay, Andrew, good seeing you. Okay,
Right,
so
right.
yeah, the 101's pretty bad this
Gotta
time
get
of day.
going.
So yeah, you should probably hit the
Traffic's
road.
horrible this time
Yeah.
of day.
He's
Yeah.
thinking I can't leave. So yeah.
He's a director, so he's probably
Emilio,
trying
right.
to direct. a
Right.
little bit.
Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought
That's
it that
true.
way.
And
Yeah.
cut. That was great, Andrew.
I find it interesting that you liked Emilio. I loved the Demi Moore section because I felt like I think through all of her years of 12-step work and
sure.
just deep, probably mental work that she's been doing, I felt she was therapizing him, which he needed desperately. She was
that's
reframing for him a lot of what they went through, and kind of, it seemed like she was helping him come to terms with this.
Yeah. I also wasn't 100% convinced that they all thought it was a bad thing for their careers. I was absolutely convinced that Andrew McCarthy thought it was a bad
He
thing.
very much did, yeah.
But I wasn't convinced they all felt the same way. Like, I felt like they were all like affirming him and his feelings about it. Like, yeah, no, I get it. I totally get it. But like, maybe they didn't all feel as bad about it. But I don't know.
I just recently read both Bloom's original article and then his retort.
Oh, yes.
And
His current retort that he did in this year.
Yeah.
and he very much portrays them negatively, just as bad people. And I definitely could see how.
In the retort too, or just
Yeah.
in the
Yes,
original?
Bloom is not apologetic in the retort. He actually, I believe, even claims to have kind of given them more of a career by putting this out there, and it got such currency. And he talks about how Carson name checked his Brat Pack invention on air, but. I could see how, as a young person in my early 20s, if somebody in print said that I was a jerk, that would really bother me. I could kind of see Andrew McCarthy's point then. But then, talking about Demi Moore and some of the others, they've moved past it. Rob Lowe seems to actually enjoy it. Like, he has a chuckle, like, oh, remember when we were young and we did these dumb things and people called us this thing. So watching it, that was kind of interesting. I do think I have maybe a softer spot for Emilio, because in the Bloom article, they even talk about one of my favorite Emilio Estevez films, Men at Work. And so I like him as a director as well as an actor. So to me, I kind of feel like he did just fine. And he seemed okay with it. He seemed pretty settled. So that's the thing for me, is how do you get beyond that? Or do you get stuck when you're 20?
Yeah.
Well, we can have several debates about this movie. And so since you're bringing this up, maybe this is the first one to have, which is this question of, did this really actually hurt their career, or did it help their career? And I would side with Bloom on this, that I think this actually helped their career.
I would agree.
It helped their longevity. It's the fact that, I said this to Lisa, like, we were watching this and we were like half an hour in, and I said, after listening to Andrew McCarthy whine for 30 minutes, I said, the existence of this movie negates its thesis.
Yeah.
The fact that this movie, that we want, that there's an audience for this movie, shows that this was not a negative thing for their career, and that in a way it has bestowed upon all these actors this sort of legendary status and centrality to that culture, to the point where there are several actors in the movie and I've heard these actors say this outside the movie before too, that they wish they were in the Brat Pack.
Right.
Like John Cryer
Yeah.
carries a little bitterness about not being in the Brat Pack. Leah Thompson wishes she was in the Brat Pack.
She said she was Brat Pack adjacent.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, that came up a lot. Yeah.
So it can't be in the long run. In the moment, I can understand if you think you're a serious actor and you know,
especially as a young person,
and this
like
comes
Mike
out,
said.
I can see how it might bother you. The fact that they all went on to have really good long careers shows that this didn't really hurt any of them in the long run.
I think the only person whose work I had a hard time coming to mind is Judd Nelson, and I just assumed that was because he chose to work as much as the others, but he didn't appear in the documentary, so perhaps he was a little bit more bitter about the moniker.
That's a good point. I actually created a spreadsheet because I wanted to check my own knowledge, because I agree with you. I felt like they've all had really long careers. So I was like, okay, let me do this. And so I went through all of their IMDb and made a list, and they worked consistently. And you're right, Mike. Judd kind of stopped at Suddenly Susan in 99.
Right.
But he's done other movies and episodics since then. So
and that
I
was
agree.
99. I mean, that was long after
years
the Brat
after,
Pack, right? So he was still working.
Sheedy is the one I thought like she kind of disappeared. Judd Nelson seems like he's always been around. He shows up on guest spots on TV, and
I remembered him from Suddenly Susan.
He makes a lot of straight to video type of movies, straight to cable. Seems like he's worked consistently. She's the one that seemed like she'll pop up once every 5 years.
Right.
It seems like in something, but
she's actually worked pretty consistently since 1990. I mean, I didn't go past. I just did the 80s, and she worked a lot in the 80s.
Yeah,
she's having a baby, Short Circuit 2, Betsy's Wedding. But then she worked. She had a consistent IMDb track since the 1990s.
Wasn't she kind of an indie darling for a while there in the 90s
think so,
too, like in movies? Just a little bit, like she was in a few
lately
claims.
too. She's been in some indie films. Yeah.
It's interesting that you said that Leah Thompson thought she was adjacent. I would say she was in some kind of Wonderful. I would consider her
in the Brat Pack.
Part of the pack, maybe a little bit more on the fringe. John Cryer, again, I just rewatched Pretty in Pink. And I think it's interesting that he considers himself Brat Pack adjacent, but Bloom thought that Tom Cruise was part of the Brat Pack. And not to deviate into that discussion, but I would argue that Tom Cruise was definitely not in any way, shape, or form in the Brat Pack. Maybe Timothy Hutton, I don't know, I would sign off on, but certainly not Tom Cruise.
Well, it's interesting, too, because I think of the Brat Pack movies being Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire is primarily who I would say. But it was interesting to hear other people. And like there was somebody in the trivia said that Taps was the first Brat Pack film.
And I would disagree. And I was thinking about this as well. By the way, I really liked Taps when I watched it. But I think its theme, it is an ensemble film, but its theme does not match with what I consider the traditional kind of Brat Pack oeuvre.
Was it a high school, military school, or was it older?
No, they were teenagers. It's supposed to be, I think, a little bit like The Citadel.
Okay, so Brat Pack
West
films
Point
kind of
Citadel.
tended to be high school films, even though I guess St. Elmo's Fire, they were college graduates.
Yeah,
even
16 to 25 demo.
Right. So they were a little bit older. So
I think for me, one of the things, because I was thinking about this, is Taps does not have, I think, many, if any, female characters, and it doesn't have that part of the coupling up that is key, I think, into defining these films.
Right.
So for me, I think, kind of getting back to what qualifies as a Brat Packer, and I consider it like a sign of love, not of hate. Maybe Bloom didn't intend it that way, but for me, that was an accomplishment. These were the big name stars of their era, just like I think in the late 80s and early 90s, if you said Arnold and Sylvester and Bruce, people would know them as action stars. It was kind of a badge of honor.
Right. I mean, isn't that's sort of key in Hollywood to me? That's what I kept thinking. Isn't it sort of key in Hollywood to have a brand, to have someone like know you as something? That's how you have a career, for better or worse, right? A lot of people don't want to be pigeonholed, but also that's kind of how you keep getting hired to some degree. I mean, I kept thinking, to me, because I didn't even know there was an article, I think, until I heard about this movie, right? I didn't even know the Brat Pack came from somebody's article. So for me, I grew up thinking of them almost as like a repertory company, like cool repertory company of cool young people, right? And to me, it was a cool thing. I mean, to me, what Lauren Schuler Donner said in the movie made the most sense, that it was like, it was a fabulous, lucky thing. I think it was something I wrote down that she said, and everybody wanted to be a part of it. It was like this aspirational thing. And that's how I always thought of it growing up. Maybe I didn't think, oh, they're so lucky.
Well, they're the face. They're the faces of Generation X. Which is like an amazing thing that they have. Yeah. That they should be so. No one would be. If he wasn't in the Brat Pack, no one would be thinking about Andrew McCarthy today. I mean, he's made a career in the last 5 years of talking about the Brat Pack.
That's also true. It's very
and so he's a travel writer. That's what he does now, and he directs episodic television. He directed a lot of The Blacklist with James Spader, who's a friend of his because he knows him through being
from the Brat Pack.
Some kind of wonderful.
But anyway,
or Pretty in Pink.
Funny that he didn't talk to James Spader. Speaking of all that,
I mean, the 80s, the movie gets at this, and this was the most interesting part of the movie to me, and so I was bummed that it only comprised about 8 to 10 minutes of it, which was this was a return to after the 1970s, which was an era of more adult filmmaking. That is to say, films, not adult filmmaking. Films, although there were plenty of those too. Deep Throat was very big in the 70s.
Cinemax.
But movies about and for adults. And in the 80s, it was a return through the emergence of shopping malls and disposable income and a roaring economy that it became a youth-centered film scene. And a lot of the biggest movies of the 80s are about young people and about teenagers. And these are the young people that happen to be the face of that. And they should be really thrilled that they hold that position in our pop culture, because nobody, I mean, I like Mannequin, but nobody's gonna be like, Mannequin is the greatest comedy Hollywood's ever produced, and that's why it's hung around. We still know about Andrew McCarthy because he was part of this group.
Right.
Well, and look at Demi Moore, that before St. Elmo's Fire, she was in the pilot for a ninja TV show.
Yeah.
Right? That alone should show the staying power of this Brat Pack, because that transported her from a bit part in a really not very good TV show into headlining major motion pictures.
That's how it works.
I ultimately think why Andrew is so, I'll just say it, butthurt about this article is not the moniker of Brat Pack, but in reading it, it says, I'm going to read the article. It says, and of Andrew McCarthy, one of the New York-based actors in St. Elmo's Fire, a co-star, says he plays all his roles with too much of the same intensity. I don't think he'll make it. Ooh. I know. And so to hear your peers, one of your co-stars say that about you, I think that's what hurt the most. And it wasn't comfortable to be mad at that co-star. And so I think he pointed all of his anger and hurt at David Bloom and got fixated on it.
Yeah.
Over the years.
He was also like 22.
Yeah,
right.
True enough.
Yeah.
You know, he was still maturing. And I mean, I carry bad stuff from my 20s with me to this day that I'm still dealing with. And, you know, it's hard. It can hang around for the rest of your life.
But do you write books and make movies about it?
I don't. I don't like to ruminate on it in that way.
That's what Emilio said. He was like, it's in the past.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to focus on that. And Demi said that as well. She said, let's not, let's move forward, stay in the present. Like, I think, and even Rob was kind of like, echoing what you were saying about, no, it was a pretty cool thing. Like, we should be proud of ourselves. And when he even said, I think we could have filled Shea Stadium, because Andrew says that, I'm like, I would have bought a ticket in my local, to go see those guys, because I had crushes on all of them.
Right.
In fact, I bet if you looked in some of my notebooks from high school, it says Christy Estevez, because I just was trying to, make that a thing.
This is an interesting point, because if that phenomena happened now, they would have a podcast.
Oh, right? Absolutely.
Just like Smartless. and they would cash in on it, and they would sell out Madison Square Garden for a live recording of their podcast.
I can't believe Andrew doesn't have a podcast.
Rob does. Rob has a very successful podcast.
Well, this brings
right?
up another question: is could you have a Brat Pack today? And I would argue you couldn't, because this was an era where a magazine article could be this big a deal. If this was 2024, first of all, a magazine article is not going to make any kind of splash, period. But even if it did, it would have a 24-hour news cycle tops before people forgot about it. It just, you couldn't have.
I mean, I think it would be in a different way. It would have. Rob Lowe seemed to be making the point that there are young people who fill this role cyclically. I don't know who they are now because I'm not that hooked into it, and maybe it's in a different way. But maybe you're right. You're right that maybe they wouldn't have a moniker like this. It wouldn't be the same level of like icon status. Just like old Hollywood, we can never have old Hollywood again. Maybe you can never have a Brat Pack.
But who in 2024 is the face of
well, that's the thing. I mean, I'm
cinema?
not a young person, so I don't.
Is there youth-based cinema right now?
I don't know. Maybe not.
Sure, there's movies about teens but they're mostly comedies, and they go to Netflix,
right,
where they again stay in the news cycle less than a day, maybe. And so, who is it? I mean, it's what's his name? Tom Holland, I guess, because he plays Spider-Man. Maybe it's Timothy Chalamet. But
Maybe.
if you tell me like
Zendaya.
if you tell me people are going to be obsessing over Timothy Chalamet in 40 years, like,
It
I don't
seems
know.
unlikely. No, you're right.
I just
I
don't see
mean,
it happening.
The branding of the Brat Pack gives it a lot of staying power. Branding is huge.
Well, I
right?
think that's a good point, because it's the economics of it that we had this magical time period, because during that time you still sold posters in the mall. And so there was a very limited set of things you could talk about and think about. We were just talking about in a movie, a particular kind of alarm clock, and how kids our age would watch this thing, and we were fascinated with it. And I said, it's because we had no iPhones. That was entertainment to us. And that doesn't exist now. And we were also talking about, the toplessness that was very common. That was titillating in a way that isn't now, because people can see who knows what on their phone. Right. So maybe there would be a Brat Pack, because it doesn't have that pressure cooker that is necessary to put all of them in there and really distill it down into a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I think that Lisa's idea, like this is a repertory company, is the thing, because I don't know that you see the same actors working with the same actors today,
not in that way,
with the frequency that you did in movies that are considered really important to the culture.
Right. Not in that way.
Just
I mean, there's
seem to
Marvel
happen.
and stuff, but that's not the same at all. It's very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the Marvel movies capture the imagination.
I agree.
They're
Yeah.
more cotton
Well,
candy.
and they're fantasy. I think the reason the Brat Pack movies, we all associated with them is because we could find ourselves in one of those
Or
characters.
you knew those people, or you related to it in some way.
Let's ask music teachers how many people signed up for saxophone lessons after St. Elmo's Fire, right?
Exactly.
Oh, Lordy.
I do want to say that, and I touched on this earlier, that there's like 10 minutes in this movie. It's sort of the half hour mark, where he talks to the author of a book about the Brat Pack. He talks to a pop culture expert, whatever that is, and they sort of expound on the meaning of these movies and how important they were to Gen X, to young people at the time, and how much we loved them, and how much we love these actors because of it. And I really wish the documentary had been about that, or been more about that than it was about Andrew McCarthy airing his beef.
His broth, if you will.
No, you're spot on. It was at a half hour that he started talking to all these people, and that's where, like you said, a lot of the meat of this, and everybody praising. I mean, even Malcolm Gladwell is like, "Yeah, I'm Ducky." Like,
right?
Yeah. So why do we care? Right? Is it purely nostalgic? Is it rose tinted glasses? Is it because We saw these are the movies we saw when we were young, and when you're young, you're innocent, and we all look back, or hopefully most of us look back fondly on our childhoods. Not everybody does, I know. Is it because of that? Is it because the movies were better then than they are now? I mean, is it because they were more representative of culture than the teen movies that are being made now are representative of their culture? I mean, what was it about this set of films, The Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, St. Elmo's Fire, 16 Candles. Yeah, the Hughes stuff especially. Like, why does it matter? I assume it matters to you guys because you do a movie podcast and you're Gen Xers.
Right.
So...
Well, I think, to me, The Breakfast Club was different than any film I can remember of that era in that we talked about it outside of the film.
Yeah.
Like that. And you mentioned I'm a Ducky. This was a conversation that was had many a time. Which character are you? Well, I think I'm a little of this and a little of that. That it was kind of the Myers-Briggs type indicator of our generation, right? And so that was important. Was it better? I would argue that film is a very good film. So yes, at a certain level, it's better. But I also think there's a certain amount of, at that time, we were a little more positive, right? It was a little more aspirational in those films. And now I think movies for young people now.
But the movies weren't. If you really watch those movies, like Ali Sheedy says, when you grow up, your heart dies in The Breakfast Club, right? And those movies were very...
To me, they were real. Like,
Yeah.
they weren't happy because it was finally saying, like, Bender gets beat up at home. And Ali Sheedy, like, was she homeless or almost homeless? Or she was definitely of a lower socioeconomic...
They do have happy endings, though.
Yeah, that's I was going to say. They go through some challenges, but ultimately it's an uplifting, positive finish. And again, this maybe more deviates into John Hughes' work than others, but to me that is part and parcel of it, because you could say, even if I was the Ali Sheedy, the weird one, that there is hope for me.
Well, just look, at the end, she's looking more like Claire.
Right.
And she's getting with the guy, the wrestling star. Didn't she get with Emilio Estevez at the end?
Yep.
So she actually turned into... Was her name Claire in the movie?
Yeah, I think
or
Claire,
did I
that
mix
sounds right.
movies?
No, I think you're right.
Yeah,
That's
Claire.
So
So isn't that interesting that instead of just, you be you, girl, you be the goth girl, no, she turned into the pretty girl and got the wrestling star.
and so you look at Anthony Michael Hall, who played a nerd in several films in this, and that was not... I think it didn't work against him. It worked for him. He was a sympathetic character. The other little nerds are like,
Oh my
you're one
gosh,
of us. So to me, it resonated with something. But I think there was, getting back to Dustin's point, a certain era where we had just enough media for this to blow up, but not so much that it got lost.
Well, I think too, what you guys talk about on your podcast a lot is also just kind of what you're saying, the access to the media. These were movies that we were going back to the video store and looking in the return. Is anybody returned Breakfast Club? I want to watch it again.
Yeah.
Like those, we wanted to see them again and again. And then when they came on the few streaming services, even though we didn't call them that, the cable channels, we were so excited, and I would tape it. I would tape The Breakfast Club. That would have been a movie I would have grabbed off of HBO or whatever. So the consumption of these definitely, I feel, was more heightened because we just have so much. You can barely even watch what's out there, let alone watch it multiple times.
Well, and I'll tell you too, Breakfast Club was a rite of passage kind of in my high school, and I don't know how many people had this experience, but this was shown in our health class.
Yeah, Molly Ringwald wrote an article, and she spoke that teachers are showing Pretty in Pink. And
I think it was for a long time. Maybe they still even do it some places. I don't know. But I was a senior in 1996. And we watched The Breakfast Club in our senior year health class and talked about it, and that's long after it came out. So, and that probably went on.
Let's talk about, so what is a Brat Packer?
Yeah,
right?
I have a list.
So the
here.
list is Estevez, Lowe, McCarthy, Moore, Nelson, Ringwald, who's not in the documentary.
Yeah.
Correct.
Sheedy, and Anthony Michael Hall. Right?
Okay, is Mayor Winningham?
No.
Not according to most lists. It says
Oh my gosh. I would totally.
No.
I mean, I read a few articles and about debating like who's in and who's out, and that seems to be the group that's like the people who left out that you might think would show up were like Matt Dillon, Mare Winningham, John Cusack, Robert Downey Jr., Mary Stuart Masterson, John Cryer, Sean Penn, Tom Cruise, Kiefer Sutherland, James Spader. Surprisingly, that's the one that kind of really surprised me because he was in a lot of those movies.
He was, yeah. I know.
Charlie Sheen is not in. Jamie Gertz is not in. Patrick Swayze, slightly too old, probably.
Yeah, I think Spader is probably also a little old. I think that's why. I just
think you're
watched
right.
Some Kind of Wonderful, and he looks 30.
Yeah, and so then there's another list I saw of. Do you have this of all the movies that?
I don't have the list.
Of that had at least 2 Brat Packers in them. So the question was like, what does it take to make a Brat Pack?
How many?
Movie?
What's
and there's
critical
actually
mass?
a lot fewer than you would think. There's only like 10 or 12 movies that had. And I would say that a lot of these movies are really not Brat Pack movies, even though they have multiple Brat Packers in them.
Yeah, I'm thinking 5 or 6 maybe, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of movies that you would think would be Brat Pack movies that
Like, why isn't The Outsiders considered a Brat Pack movie?
Yeah.
Because that had so many. They were
got a
in high
critical
school.
mass of people.
did, yeah.
Like
But
that.
I don't- yeah.
Although Mike made an interesting point about not female Brat Packers being, it doesn't have that mix.
It doesn't have-
Male
Well, the
and
list
female,
I
really.
saw
So that's interesting.
considers Outsiders.
Okay.
Because it has Lowe and Estevez.
It has a lot.
and then it has a lot of Brat Pack adjacents or BPAs. The actors we just missed.
So I'm going to have to fall back on the Supreme Court here. I know it when I see it, right? And I don't think The Outsiders
feeling.
is that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't include it either. But
Because like Ralph Macchio and Michael J. Fox would not be considered. But
No.
why
No.
not?
Yeah, such a
so,
good
so
question.
here's what I think is in my
don't know.
expert opinion as a experienced 80s movie podcaster.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's Breakfast Club,
Absolutely.
obviously, right?
Yeah.
Pretty in Pink, obviously.
Yeah.
16 Candles.
Yeah.
About Last Night, which is
Okay.
a David Mamet romantic comedy with Rob Lowe and
Very interesting.
Demi
Demi
Moore.
Moore.
I would include Oxford Blues.
Oh, really?
Which is Rob Lowe and Ali Sheedy.
Oh, I forgot she was in
St.
that.
Elmo's Fire, which is
Yeah.
ground zero for Brat Pack movies because they're all in it, and it's
Yeah.
about young angst.
Yeah,
Right.
totally.
Right.
Class, which is Rob Lowe and Andrew McCarthy. Fresh Horses, which is McCarthy and Molly Ringwald. And I would say it kind of stops there, but the other movies you see are like Betsy's Wedding, Blue City, Wisdom, The Outsiders, as
Did
we
you
mentioned.
did you mention 16 Candles? You must have.
I did.
He did, yeah. Yeah,
But I
think
feel like the movie has to be like the fact that they're young people has to be at the heart of the movie,
Right.
and it has to somehow be about like young angst.
I'm
It can't
Growing
just
up.
be.
I'm going to go.
What about-
I think you need 3.
Okay.
At least 3 Brat Packers, one of each gender.
Oh well, then there's hardly any. Then
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
What
I
about
think
War
that-
Games? Because that had Ali Sheedy and Matthew Broderick, who isn't considered a Brat Packer.
BPA, though. He's
a BPA.
outside.
He's a BPA.
He's outside.
Isn't it funny that Ferris Bueller isn't in the Brat Pack? Isn't that a little weird?
Is that-
a little weird?
Okay, Jennifer Grey,
Right?
and Broderick, and it's because they had that
Wait a
French
minute.
girl.
By Mike's criteria here, though, we're down to one movie.
What? No, it's St. Elmo's Fire and Breakfast Club,
Oh, no, you're
16
right. You're
Candles.
Right. So we've got 2. Well, who's
And
who's
Pretty
in
in
16
Pink.
Candles? There's only 2.
No, there's Spader.
Spader's not in there.
no.
He's a
You're thinking
BPA.
Pretty in
Oh,
Pink.
okay.
Yeah.
16 Candles is Ringwald
Okay, then-
and Anthony Michael Hall.
Then my 3 or
Anthony
more
Michael Hall,
falls down.
I would also say is not really in the Brat Pack.
No, is he
And he
BPA?
declined to
I actually don't think
participate.
he's BPA. I think he's some sort of ancillary.
He has
kind
to
of.
be in it, though. He was in Breakfast Club.
Yeah, but there's something about him that I think, like Michael J. Fox, he's in his own category.
Well, I wonder if
I
it's
don't think he's part of the repertoire.
in David Blum's part of the movie when he's talking to him. He was like, "You guys were all adults. You weren't minors. I wouldn't write about minors." And I think Anthony Michael Hall was a
good
minor for at least for those movies.
Well,
I think.
So was Molly Ringwald.
Molly was,
was
for
she?
Breakfast
Yeah.
Club.
Oh well, I don't know if she
there
was part of
the
that article
scene
or
where
not.
Bender drops the pencil and looks at her panties. That was not
that's
her,
not her,
crotch.
because she's a minor.
Because her
I
mother
see.
was like, "You're not filming my
I would
daughter's
love it if that
crotch."
was John Hughes.
What's that?
His
If
crotch.
Hughes said, yeah, like, I'll do it.
You can tell by the hair on the leg.
Yeah.
if you look real close.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because I think of her as like the iconic Brat Pack gal, but
really, I think
me.
I would
Yeah,
maybe go
absolutely.
to me instead of Molly, but Molly's up there, right? Yeah.
I think I was so used to. I actually came to the Brat Pack movies later because I was too young to see them when they came out. So I saw them more when I was a teenager, and I knew Demi Moore at that point as like Ghost, and
sure. Yeah,
in
that
her
makes
major
sense.
fame, right? So
Yeah.
I wasn't really thinking of her as a Brat Packer then.
Right.
I mean, I get it now, but to me,
Well, and
it was
even in
Molly.
St. Elmo's Fire, I feel like she's older than the others. Either that or she didn't go to college. She was kind of like the career woman.
Demi
Moore's
right.
character in St. Elmo's Fire. All the rest of them went to the Ivy Leagues, and she kind of went into the fashion industry or something.
That's right.
And she had this air of being
department.
older, at least in my memory
and
of it.
what we
as a
brought up before,
teenager.
James Spader, he was definitely
Yes.
he came across as older than the others. So that's very interesting. Was Anthony Michael Hall? Did he come across too young? And so
He definitely
wasn't
seemed really
in
young to
that
me at the
appealing
time.
Well, the thing that
category.
I read Cryer's book, and the thing he said was that the reason he felt like he was not in the Brat Pack is because he wasn't socially in the Brat Pack. He
Yeah.
didn't drink, he didn't do drugs, and he was never invited to go out. He said he never socially went out with any of these actors, including McCarthy and Ringwald, and who he made a movie with, obviously.
Right.
And he always resented that. He's like, if they had asked me, I would have gone. But he's like, I was just left out.
Did they look at him as Ducky? Was he like?
I don't
Oh,
know.
that's a
I
great
mean, who knows?
question.
I think it's
I think he did say, like, you know, he was seen as kind of square, like he
Yeah.
didn't do drugs and he didn't
Yeah.
really drink, and so he just wasn't, part of
gonna be
that.
Part of it.
He was
mean-
boring to them.
Yeah, I mean the '80s were coke fueled. I'm sure all of these people, like Demi Moore's problems, have been well publicized.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm sure all of these people, you know, Rob Lowe freely admits he was a massive coke addict.
right.
That's their point. They were all like,
Well, she had a sober
Swimming
companion
in
Yeah, she
on
did.
St.
I
Elmo's
know.
Fire,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
was her, like you just said, her first
Yeah, it was her
big
first
film.
major role,
She
and
was
she was
already so
already-
coked
yeah.
out. She had to have a sober companion to keep her
That was
like straight
wild.
and narrow.
Yeah.
And they didn't
Wow.
just recast. That was like,
Right.
oh, okay, well, I guess we're going to have to do that this
Right.
time.
They
Yeah.
really committed to her. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been better for Cryer's career that he wasn't. Maybe I mean he seems
Well, you have
He's
to
done
say
quite well.
11 years on 2.5 Men. If he's not financially set, his manager is a horrible manager, right?
Right.
But yeah, he has continued to work, and he comes across very sympathetically, right?
yeah.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that Molly Ringwald, because as we were talking or before the podcast, she always, even from 16 Candles era, came across to me as not sympathetic. She seemed very stuck up.
you
and
bought into her character from Breakfast Club.
Perhaps so. She never got past it. Her and Bradley Cooper.
She never got past it, or you?
Mike's got his own Bratz movie coming.
No, he's right, because even in Pretty in Pink, where she's supposedly the kid living in
Working class.
poverty,
Right.
the
Right.
wrong side of the tracks, she was still cooler than all the other girls, and so
Yeah.
And Ducky, and she was unattainable for Ducky, who as a Ducky,
Yeah.
I obviously
Well, and
sympathized
here's-
with,
I was- yeah.
and so she wasn't playing snobby in that movie, but
No.
there was
She's
There's some
different
kind of
from all the
elite-
other girls.
yeah.
There's something that makes her rise above.
Yeah.
The thing I wonder about John Cryer is like, it's okay that he wasn't part of the Brat Pack because he had his own brand. He had Ducky. He was Ducky.
Right.
And that gave him a lot of cachet, I think. I think that's his Brat Pack.
Speaking
is
of
Ducky.
which, where do you guys land on Ducky versus Blaine?
Yeah.
Oh, I hate Blaine. Ducky all the way.
Ducky.
Really?
Yeah.
I disagree.
I mean, I'm sure when I was 16, I was like her. I wanted to date the Blaine, but I probably hung out with the Ducky.
I mean, that's Pretty in Pink right there.
I'm so
right?
glad
That's-
that she
yeah.
didn't end up with Ducky, because the movie
not.
to me would have felt like a giant lie, because I was a Ducky, and John Hughes is a filmmaker that I really loved back then. I still love him, and one of the reasons I love him is because he doesn't lie to his audience about teenagers and their troubles, and it would have felt like, I mean, I get the having a fairy tale happy ending, but that's what it would have been. Like she would pick Blaine.
Right.
There's no girl in the real world that would have picked
At least
Ducky.
at that age, as Christy is saying, at
Yeah.
that age, that's. how
I mean,
you
that's
think.
why.
Yeah.
That's why she picks Blaine, is because
Right.
is because Molly Ringwald said this is ridiculous. Like, she wouldn't. my character would not go with Ducky. And then he's like, no, people are going to love it. And then they did the test screening and people hated it. And he was like, oh, Molly was right all along. So they went back and reshot it with the worst wig in Hollywood history.
Yes.
Which everyone admits to now. Yeah.
But yeah, like, so I feel like it had to be Blaine in order for the movie to ring true to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
But I'm not surprised you like Ducky because you're a fan of romantic comedies. You're always going to go for the Hollywood ending, the happy ending.
Oh,
well, and who doesn't like Ducky? Everyone likes Ducky.
Yeah, Ducky steals that film.
Yeah.
Right. And it's sad to me that John Cryer is it sounds like sad that he's still identified as Ducky. I think that, again, it's a badge of honor.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
To be that character, to have that lasting position, because he's not a bad character. Everyone loves that character. It's fondly. I think you're probably right with Teenage Love that Blaine was probably a more probable choice for her. I would argue there's a third road, which is she doesn't pick either one, which also is
that probably would have been the best possible ending. Yeah,
I think that maybe
she doesn't
would
need
have
either of them.
Right. But
that would be me today.
Yeah, that's what it would be today. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that wasn't going to happen in an 80s movie.
No.
No. In the 80s movie, you had to pick. You couldn't not pick.
What about this? Here's the other Hughes controversy. Speaking of Hughes endings, Ali Sheedy's character at the end of Breakfast Club gets this makeover and then inexplicably goes with the guy that she's expressed zero interest in for the previous 90 minutes, the Estevez character. Where do you stand on that?
It doesn't ring true because I don't think Emilio Estevez, he understands his standing. That's the whole point. He's in detention because he was trying to prove who he was in the hierarchy of the high school cliques. Mm-hmm. So I don't think he would risk his own credentials at school on Monday being seen with her character.
Here's something I'm not remembering about the Breakfast Club.
It's interesting that you immediately think about it from his point of view, though, and not from hers.
Well, because you asked.
Would she?
Oh, would she?
Would she? Would she submit to that makeover and then be attracted to the high school wrestler?
Yeah, because I think as the girl who associates with Ali Sheedy's character, I was her. Minus I wasn't in the goth, but that's who I felt more aligned with. You are always aspiring, and because you want those credentials, you want to be one of the popular kids, even though you absolutely hate them.
Yeah,
and
I think that's
but you want to be in that strata.
And I'll also say, I mean, the thing that rings true to me about the makeover is, as you say, the aspirational thing. You hate it, but you want it. But also, like, you're bonding. You're girl bonding. Makeovers are part of girl bonding, at least at that age, in that context. And you're playing around with identity all the time, right? Like, so maybe I'll try and see what it's like to be the girl with the makeup and the pink and whatever. Mm-hmm. So that actually, whether it's good or not, or a good message or not, that's a different question. I do think it sort of rings true that she would submit to it.
I would argue that the girls that I knew in high school that were the goth and in that category had a history of they would go with the popular jock if given the option. Right. And maybe it's what Christy's saying. It's about the popularity. As the Anthony Michael Hall, I very much felt that it was all based on popularity and physical appearance and all of that. So to me, it was like there was no world in which anyone would go with the geek. Ducky was destined to be alone.
Which one of them was...
That was just the math.
Yeah.
My memory is failing me. Which one of them was there just because it sounded cool?
I think that was Anthony Michael Hall, right?
No, he brought the gun to school.
Yeah,
then it was Ali Sheedy, wasn't it?
I think it was Ali
That's
Sheedy.
who it was.
She said that she was there because she had nothing better to do.
Right.
Which I think she was lying. I think that was performative. I think she did something.
That could be,
but
yeah. My question, I don't remember. It's been a really long time since I've seen The Breakfast Club, so I'm not remembering this, but...
Which part of it would you like me to recite?
We'll get there.
Because I could do it.
I'm sure that you could. I believe it. I guess what I'm not remembering about The Breakfast Club is if they address this idea of what happens Monday, right? Because all we're seeing is them leaving and being like, now we all know each other and it's all cool.
Do they?
But
voiceover,
they're not.
right?
But we never see
No, not even.
I'm sure
one
that
of them
they do.
asks one of them asks Claire
On the balcony,
says
right?
on Monday, are you going to pretend like you know me? Or I think it's Nelson. Judd
Yeah.
Nelson asks, "Are you going to pretend you know Brian if you pass him in the hall?"
Right.
And
No.
she goes, "Honestly," and he's like, "Yeah," and she's like, "No."
Well,
And
exactly.
then
So
that's
here's
when he
my
explodes at
here's
her.
my
Yeah.
point: is like, are these people? I mean, they've made this bond. It's all great, but like, all we're seeing is them leaving detention. We're not seeing Monday morning. We're not even seeing them going home. So like, we're a little bit. You see them get in the cars or whatever. But I think, like maybe she probably doesn't keep up with that makeover. She probably doesn't date the jock, but that's where we're at when we see them leave, right? So I don't know that
It's the hopeful ending, though.
it is. It's a great ending. It's a whole. I'm not saying it's bad.
You can believe what you want to believe.
But
yeah.
what I'm saying is we can't say if it's, I mean, it may not be unrealistic in the sense that, maybe they will be together Monday, maybe they won't, but this is where they're at now.
I wonder if as teenagers, like you and I, because we saw this when we were at that same age, I think we wanted to wish this could happen.
Of course.
But we all knew
aspirational.
those people are not gonna talk to us
I mean,
on
they even
Monday.
address that in Bratz too, don't they? Talk about like, you're seeing these people become friends, and that's such a wonderful aspirational thing. You want friends like this. You want, it's
Well,
like
McCarthy says at the beginning, he's like, I haven't spoken to any of these people in 30 years.
Right.
People assume that we all still like ride around on a bus together, and we none of us
Yeah.
hang out with each other.
That was
None of
really
us like,
sad.
yeah,
Yeah.
like they'll see each other at Comic Cons and
Right.
stuff like that, but they're not.
Well, I'm just talking about you're seeing these people up on the screen be friends, and you want that, right? Like,
Yeah.
and maybe you think they are that in person too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right, here's a question.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Favorite Brat Packer?
Oh, easy. Emilio Estevez.
Emilio, why? Just because he's cute?
Yeah, he's cute. I had a crush on him when I was a kid. Yeah. Yeah. That just doesn't
like
go
it.
away.
I
Your
like
first
it.
crush, like
He
Hollywood.
had arguably maybe the best career of
Yeah.
any of these people post Brat Pack, because he became a pretty good director who made some really good stuff.
And I remember
And he
thinking,
did Young Guns, and he had some hits post.
and I found it very admirable at 16. I got on my high horse because he did not take the Nepo baby role and keep the Sheen name. He went to his father's original last name and blazing a trail by him on his own, not like his brother who rode the coattails of Daddy.
I was always so
I
confused
have
by their last
very
names.
moral high ground.
Yeah.
Do you need the list? Favorite
Well-
Brat Packer?
So I would say of your list, probably Anthony Michael Hall, but I'm not sure he qualifies as a Brat Packer. I do think he's in his own orbit. Of the remaining, it's hard to argue with Emilio and kind of the things you've talked about. I really think he has a lot of talent. At that time, he was my favorite Estevez. When everyone else was into Sheen, I was into Estevez.
Everybody's got a favorite estimate.
Yeah.
I was always so confused by their last name mix up. Like,
Yeah.
I just could never.
Lisa, who's your favorite Brat Packer?
I'm so terrible at your favorite. I don't know. Who's my favorite? I like Molly Ringwald, even though I think a lot of people don't like her. I don't know.
That's
like
fair. You
her.
get
She
to
was
like
the
her.
face of the John Hughes movie.
She was.
Yeah,
she was.
I think it's that. I like the clothes.
Remember For Keeps?
Oh, yeah.
I loved that movie.
I also I remember her most, at least I think I saw her in Pretty in Pink first, and I just loved Pretty in Pink so much. I didn't see The Breakfast Club first, so maybe that would have changed my mind, but because I saw Pretty in Pink first, it was like, wow, she's so cool. So I don't know. I guess I think she's cool.
All right, Dustin, who's yours?
Who's my favorite Brat Packer? Yeah, I mean, probably as an icon, it's probably Molly Ringwald. I find Rob Lowe to be a tremendously amusing person today.
I agree.
Oh, he's
Like,
so
I think his
good.
podcast is very funny. I think he's very charismatic.
What's the show we love that I can't remember right now?
Parks and Rec, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
Well, the Grinder.
The Grinder. Did you watch
One
The Grinder?
season canceled by Fox prematurely. Go find that. You will enjoy
We
it.
have to find the DVD for Dustin of that. It is so
Yeah.
good.
And I guess maybe that's the thing. I don't even I like him now, but not as a Brat Packer. Is that weird? Like,
Oh, I had a
yeah,
huge
I
crush
would
on
say,
him at
well,
St. Elmo's
he's
Fire.
very
I think I'm a bigger fan of Rob
Bad
Lowe
Boy?
since Parks and Rec than
right.
before.
Like, I liked him in Wayne's World. I thought
And he
he
was
really
such a
fun
jerk in
Wayne's
St.
World.
Elmo's Fire.
He is a jerk in
He was such a bad boy.
Yeah.
But
I actually really
so
like Anthony
hot.
Michael Hall now too.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
I think how he's kind of reinvented
He's really kinda
himself.
grown
I'm
up,
glad that
yeah.
he's like showing up in more stuff.
I've liked him as an adult too.
I think he came close to having like the greatest career ever, and he just didn't make the right choices. Like he was Kubrick wanted him for Full Metal Jacket and spent a year negotiating with his agent. And postponed the shoot for a year, which Kubrick never does for anybody.
Was that the Modine character?
Yeah. And ultimately, like, they couldn't come to a financial... and I think had Anthony Michael Hall done that, that might have made...
Yeah.
Holy mackerel.
I mean, he did fine. He did The Dead Zone. He's worked consistently.
He has.
Yeah, he's done okay, but I think that would have been great to see him in that.
Yeah, it would have been different. I mean, it's funny when you look at this list, like, none of them... They all did well. You still know who all these people are, and they all still work. Yeah. But none of them did. None of them is Will Smith, Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks.
Right.
None of them got to like the next level of superstardom.
Demi maybe during
she kind of had a
the G.I. Jane era. She was maybe.
Yeah, she was probably the biggest of all of them.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, she's not Tom Cruise.
Otherwise.
Yeah.
However, to be fair, though, most actors, if they get one film like The Breakfast Club, are perfectly happy. That's a great career. They expect that they're going to have a lot. They're going to work a lot, and not everything is going to be huge.
So that's interesting. Does that affect our distinction of the other BPAs, like a Tom Cruise, like a Robert Downey Jr.? Now, he didn't hit it until more recently.
Right. Yeah.
But as I'm looking at the list of the BPAs...
John Cusack, Nicolas Cage, like a lot of these, Sean Penn, these are all actors that did way better.
Right.
Kevin Bacon.
So is that why...
did way better than any of these people.
Right.
So maybe there's some truth to this idea that like being in the Brat Pack was
held you back a little
limiting.
bit. Yeah.
I don't think it's much limiting. It's just the statistics that very few actors get big, right?
Yeah.
I think they all had surprisingly good careers for actors.
Did we get tired of them? Were they in too many films
that's a good
during
question.
that 83
Maybe
to 86?
Molly Ringwald.
Yeah.
I mean, she made bad choices too. They all made some bad choices. That's part of it.
But when you're young...
Ali Sheedy did Short Circuit. Molly Ringwald...
Okay,
like,
now, come on.
I mean, that was her big post Brat Pack sort of accomplishment.
You could criticize Fisher Stevens for Short Circuit, but I don't think Ali Sheedy deserves that. Plus, it was filmed in Oregon.
No, I'm saying the movie. I mean, I like these movies. I mean, look, but Andrew McCarthy did. I mean, this is a guy that in if you believe, and I think you have to, his whining in this film, like he thought of himself as a really serious young actor, and I think he had aspirations to be like
he was like a New York actor.
Laurence Olivier.
Yeah, like he wanted to be Brando, like they all did, or De Niro, or Pacino, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then he did Weekend at Bernie's and Mannequin. I mean, those are the types of, and then he did like made for cable movies.
And there's plenty of love for those movies, but as you're saying, they're not going to make you
and those were
Brando.
hits, and that's fine. And he picked them, he did them. I mean, who knows what he was being offered, but yeah, I mean, he was always sort of a lightweight.
It's interesting because I think you're right. I think he saw himself as a very serious, and somewhere in here I know I wrote down or that he said I was very it was like determined or motivated or like that kind
intense.
But yet he talks about going to the park and getting a joint and skating
and
getting
NYU
stoned instead of going to class. So
good point.
How motivated and pursuant of this career are you if every day instead of going to class you are in Washington Park?
That's different from how Tom Cruise probably comported himself, who was like scary laser focused.
Yeah, frighteningly focused.
Like you don't want to be near this guy kind of laser focused.
So while we're Andrew bashing,
I don't want to bash him. Like I just think I actually like him. I like him as an actor. I liked a lot of the movies he made in that era, but I think he doesn't quite understand who he was as an actor. Like his part of his appeal is that he was kind of this doesn't sound negative, but I don't mean it that way. like a faceless, like kind of a vapid, like all surface kind of blank. I mean, that's what he made Blaine.
Yeah, you're saying
Blaine
Cypher
right?
almost.
But if you look at Less Than Zero. Like he's kind of perfectly cast in that movie because he's this sort of like blank personality that
you know what he's like. You guys know The Great Gatsby, the book.
Yes.
You know that Nick is the friend of Gatsby, right? He's that guy. He's like on the outside watching everything happen, but he's also part of the.
It's a really good movie that uses him really well. Is is The Year of the Gun. It's a John Frankenheimer thriller set in Italy in the 70s when the Red Brigades were going on. And he plays a writer he's a journalist, and he goes to Italy at that time, and he's working on a fictional book about the kidnapping and execution of the Italian president. And the Red Brigade finds out about this, and it turns out they are actually planning this actual kidnapping, and they think that he has insider information about it, and so they come after him. It's actually a really good thriller, but he's perfect in it because he seems so out of his depth.
Naive.
Like he looks, completely like he should not be in that movie at all. Like, and if it was an actor that seemed more aware or somebody who had it all together, it wouldn't work at all. So those are the kinds of movies. Our mutual friend Brian Trenchard Smith made an Andrew McCarthy movie where he was used pretty well too. It was a made-for-cable movie called The Escape Clause. About a guy who's just way in over his head and gets mixed up in all this intrigue.
Brian worked with Cusack as well, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So, all right.
Is BTS in the Brown?
BPA?
Is he a BPA? Yeah.
He's his own thing.
You'll have to ask him.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to ask you, what did you think of the way that he chose to make the film? Mike was annoyed by all of the car scenes showing Andrew getting lost.
Oh, interesting.
Going to the different...
It was annoyingly shot. The fake film footage that was like all jerky. That would like it was
grainy.
I did like that he acknowledged that he just set up his iPhone at one point to like as a B camera.
Allie to like frame it for him.
Yeah,
She did.
That was a bit of a hoot when he was talking Ali Sheedy through being his camera op. There's also some of the phone calls. I felt like we could have had some editing on him. Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why are we listening to this?
Right.
We haven't talked about the central appeal of this entire movie, which is seeing all of these homes.
Oh my God, their houses.
Yes.
That was the whole. Emilio Estevez's kitchen is the room I want to die.
We were just like,
in.
these are beautiful houses.
It was one gorgeous, and that's again, talk about a movie negating its own premise. If this was so injurious to all their careers, they've done okay. These houses are unbelievable.
Yes, I want to go to Demi Moore's house.
I had to pause so we could talk about how upset Leah Thompson must be that no one cleared the kitchen table for that interview.
I was like, why? There's an Amazon box. Yeah. I mean, I was like, whose idea was this?
The whole time I'm distracted by what snacks they like.
Ritz crackers.
Oh, they like Cheez-Its?
I was real surprised
I see where they're going.
I was like, they must have other rooms in their house. I was really surprised.
I think that's why Leah said, I'm going to take my interview out into the garden.
But I'm just thinking, take an arm and sweep that onto the floor if you had to.
Nobody knows I'm married to Howie Deutsch right now.
Oh my goodness.
Gosh.
But
that was funny.
yes, and Demi's house is. I couldn't tell if that would be a wonderful place to live or a horrible place to live.
It did look like a museum a little bit, or like a resort.
Yeah, or maybe they're like the set of some Netflix science fiction thriller or something.
Oh.
Like just they're taking genetic material while you're sleeping. It would look weird, but I agree with you that the entire existence of this film kind of disproves its premise.
Yeah.
And Bloom talks about it in his retort that if you have this red carpet, star-studded premiere of this movie, how bad has this really been, right? And a very cynical person, which of course I am not, would say that maybe Andrew McCarthy is using this to resurrect his career. If you were cynical, he would say.
But I don't think he ever felt comfortable in himself. When they show the images of the party after, was it the party after Pretty in Pink?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
And he looked so uncomfortable and he even admitted, I left the party right away and went over to the Hamburger Hamlet and got, wasted.
Yeah.
I don't think he ever felt comfortable. So I think there was a lot of projection here on his part. And like you said, you're right. He was 20 and I can't even imagine being a young person.
I know.
And everybody knows you and you're already dealing with all of the angst that all of us went through as young people. Yes. And then now you're on this huge stage and people are are giving their opinions about
crazy.
you, and
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what
It
that
would be horrible. I would
does
hate
to your
it.
head.
I mean, absolutely. It's
I mean,
tough.
whatever else I would say about the movie, I don't think it was insincere. I think he
Yeah,
really
no.
feels these things. You
Yeah, I
can
think
tell by
so.
the way he's venting at most of the interviews are not really interviews. They're him venting at all
Yeah,
these Brat
he's
Pack
talking
members,
at them.
which is interesting. That a more interesting movie, a more daring movie, would have leaned into that idea, like a more reflective movie. But you know, it did have one of the funniest credits I've seen in a while at the end, which it said this film was inspired by the book Brat by Andrew McCarthy, and I just thought, I'm going to do that. My next movie is going to be at the end. It's going to be inspired by one of my own ideas.
I saw that too.
This idea was inspired by one of my other ideas.
Available at major retailers.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I think, circling back to, I think at the beginning of the podcast, you said somebody said he needed a hug. I very much felt like,
Yeah.
Andrew needs to get into therapy because he still hasn't reconciled with all of this. And it was obvious in this film. I did add up how much time he was on screen
Interesting.
just by himself kind of talking or walking through the park or, and like the grainy affected. And out of the 92 minutes, he was on screen all by himself talking for about 14 minutes.
Okay.
And then in
That's
the
a lot.
car,
Significant.
he was on screen in the car strictly talking or getting lost for almost 8 minutes, 7 minutes, 45 seconds. And I did that because Mike mentioned, we could do without the car scene.
Yeah. So, kind of getting back to what you were saying, would it have been a more interesting documentary if instead he would go to these people and say, "Why do you think this bothered me so much more than you?" Right? I mean, that's fundamentally the question here,
rough.
right?
Yeah.
Just own it. Like, man, I have not gotten past this, and you have. What's your secret?
Yeah.
I gave him credit for going to speak to David Blum, though.
Yes,
that had to have been
you're right.
hard, considering how it makes him feel.
And I will say that David Blum didn't come off well in that scene. And
No.
I don't know. I was skeptical of how bad this article could have been until I saw that scene. And I was like, oh, he is kind of a...
Well, but I know, and I agree. I guess I just think, and I'm sure he's done well for himself as a journalist, but he certainly didn't do as well as these people did.
Right.
Like,
I think there was some jealousy there when you sit there and you see all these women coming around Rob Lowe and Emilio Estevez, and they're getting drinks handed to them.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a certain level of, well, why are you there and I'm not?
Right. I mean, it's hard to make a living as a writer, and clearly he's done that. So that's doing well for yourself in and of itself, but it's not the same as being in the Brat Pack.
Post Paris Hilton, post Lindsay Lohan world, like no one would care. Can you imagine an article came out today about Timothy Chalamet and he's just partying too much? Like
We'd be like, well,
everybody would be
yeah.
like, yeah.
No, that's not what I'm saying is I get why he would feel why he comes off the way he does because, he didn't do as well as they did because he couldn't possibly. He's a magazine writer,
Well, and he kind of didn't even come up with Brat Pack. He was eating dinner and somebody walked up and said, "Hey, did he say that in the movie?" Or
he told some, I feel like I remember.
and he says they
about
called us the Fat Pack, and I was like,
Yes.
"Oh, Brat Pack, that would be."
I
I did think it was really ironic too that Rob Lowe made the connection that, or maybe it was Leah Thompson, that here that name is from the Rat Pack,
Yes.
which was the epitome of who you wanted to be, which we all agree that so was the Brat Pack, but it was like the coolest people in Hollywood.
Well, and they owned it, right? Like they were like, yeah, we're the Rat Pack, and we're going to go around and make a show of it.
Yeah.
And we're,
Exactly.
they had
They
no
weren't
problem with
upset
it.
about that title at all.
No,
And is it because the Rat Pack were older and they were, a little more mature and a little more secure in their position, and so it landed?
Well, and maybe
differently.
they didn't. I mean, I'm sure they took themselves. Some of them took themselves seriously, probably, but maybe they were more entertainers or saw themselves more as entertainers than as serious New York dramatic actors. Maybe that it's a self-perception thing.
I was going to say, I think
don't know.
Sinatra probably took his career pretty
For
serious.
sure. Oh, yeah. When I started to say that, I was like, well, there's
But then,
Sinatra, but-
Sammy Davis Jr. seems to have had a pretty good, approach to life, pretty lighthearted. So maybe, maybe there's some of that too.
And Frank Sinatra he's done some really good acting, right? But I would suspect he would probably see himself more as an entertainer than as a serious dramatic actor, would be my guess. as much as I know about Frank Sinatra's brain, which is zero. So.
Yeah.
So I didn't read the review, but as I was looking on IMDb on this Bratz, the film, there was one review and it said it turns out that the actual Brat is David Bloom.
Not a lot of love for David Bloom.
Yeah.
So that was, well, thank you guys for joining us and doing this collaborative podcast with us.
Yeah.
And we're both going to release it on our own platforms. So hopefully we get some audiences that don't know each other. Now, there's
Awesome.
2 wonderful movie podcasts out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. So much
Can
fun
I
to
just
talk
say
to you guys
before we
always.
go
Yeah.
one thing, just so that, because I've been ripping on poor Andrew McCarthy for the last hour and a lot of these people, but I just want to say, like, I love these movies.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
This is why I wanted that 10 minutes. I was like, this is the movie I want to see, a celebration of these movies, because these movies they mean a lot to me. I like these movies more than I like most people. I've said that on our podcast before too. People
Yes.
are probably thinking I'm some kind of sociopath, but it's true. They just mean that they're formative. Like, they help make me who I am. They're one of the reasons that I love film, that I dedicated my life to film, and they mean a lot to me, and these people mean a lot to me.
Yeah.
The people in this movie, and it was, even though I didn't love the documentary, it was fun just to spend time with them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was fun to see
Totally.
people that I haven't seen forever, like Ali Sheedy
Yeah.
or Emilio Estevez, frankly, who works mostly behind the camera now, and he doesn't do interviews, as we know. So it was just cool to see him seeming like he has it all together and like things are going well. He's got this beautiful house.
Yeah,
And it's just like,
yeah.
man, I love this guy. Like,
I wanted to
even
see
like
more
the
of
bad
them.
ones. I
There's-
love
yeah.
Wisdom, Men at Work. Like, even the movies that are pretty objectively not that great. I'm just so happy, like, that these people were around when I was young, and that we still have these movies to go back to.
100%. I can't
Yeah.
agree with you more. We generally don't like to hate watch anything. And
No.
I've watched this Bratz, the documentary, 3 times. I loved it. And I think it's largely because getting to revisit all of those characters and those films and to be reminded, oh yeah, that was such an important point,
Yeah.
or that was such an important moment, or, oh, that was so inspirational, or I saw myself in that
Yeah.
person. So absolutely nothing but love for all of these actors and all these movies. I mean, Morgan Stewart Coming Home is one of my favorites.
Well, and
Even I won't go that far.
well, and Mike said this before we started. It's good to remember these are human beings, and like we can empathize with that.
Yeah.
and how hard it might be to carry some of this stuff around, even if you did do well. It
Yeah.
still might be hard to carry it around.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
All right, everybody, have a good rest of your day, and thank you for joining us.
You've been listening to The Long Rewind. The program is produced by Dustin Morrow and hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli. If you enjoy the show, please consider hitting the subscribe button, leave us a good review on your podcast app, and tell your friends about the program. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.